At the height of his fame, Charlie Sheen was one of Hollywood's most powerful stars. On camera, he delivered intensity, charm, and box office results. Off camera, he built an even bigger reputation as a reckless bad boy. He became the highest paid actor on television while battling addiction to drugs, alcohol, and sex. Sheen has claimed he has been sober since 2017. He released a memoir. He went on tour. Where said his HIV was manageable. But in October 2025, something shifted. Fans spotted him in Malibu with someone new, living quietly in a way he had never shown before. Yes. Then came a podcast where he claimed a miracle HIV drug exists but is being kept from people like him. That reignited the same question people have asked for decades. What is Charlie Sheen not telling us? The answer may explain the entire shape of his comeback. Charlie Sheen was born Carlos Irwin Estevez on September 3, 1965 in New York City, into a life already wrapped in fame and tension. His father, Martin Sheen, was an Irish-American actor just beginning to break through after landing a major role in 1965. His mother, Janet Templeton, was an artist who tried to keep balance in a household that rarely felt stable. Charlie was the youngest of 4 boys, growing up in a home where ambition and instability lived side by side. In 1966, the family moved to Dayton, Ohio for his father's theater work. And even at a young age, Charlie learned that life followed auditions, rehearsals, and sudden changes. Behind the scenes, things were heavier than they looked. Sheen struggled with alcoholism and would sometimes pass out at the dinner table, moments that burned into Charlie's memory and never fully left him. As Martin's career grew, especially after Apocalypse Now in 1979, the family was pulled deeper into Hollywood's glow and excess. Charlie was only 12 then, wandering film sets and sneaking small sips of beer from craft services. It seemed harmless, but it quietly planted something inside him. Fame, stress, alcohol, and chaos mixed together during years when he was still forming his identity. In 1974, the family settled in Malibu, chasing opportunity and sunshine. I enrolled at Santa Monica High School, but school never stood a chance. Hollywood felt louder and more exciting. By the age of 9, he was all ready. Sneaking onto his brother Emilio's film sets, watching cameras roll and actors transform, classes became optional in his mind. His attendance dropped to around 33%. His grades collapsed and he was expelled just before graduation. He lost a baseball scholarship to the University of Kansas, a devastating blow since he dreamed of playing shortstop for the Cincinnati Reds when his parents pushed him to finish school through summer classes. He laughed it off, shocked that school even existed during summer. At 17, 1982, Charlie officially dropped out and went all-in on acting. He took small jobs, commercials, and extra work, doing whatever he could to stay close to the industry. He had already tasted it early, appearing with his father in a television film at age 9 and working as an extra on Apocalypse Now in 1979. Those moments were small, but they hooked him. Auditions replaced classrooms, and uncertainty replaced structure. He wanted success on his own terms, even if it meant falling hard. That gamble paid off in 1984 when he landed Red Dawn at just 18. The film introduced the PG-13 rating and cast him as one of the teenage Wolverines fighting a Soviet invasion. Filming ran from late 1983 through the end of the year, and he reportedly earned around $50,000. When the movie premiered in August 1984, it exploded at the box office. Overnight, Charlie became one of the faces of the decade. The controversy around the film's violence only made it bigger, locking him into 1980s pop culture instead of playing it safe. He turned darker in 1985 with The Boys Next Door playing a troubled teen drifting toward violence. Much of his dialogue was improvised, pulled from stories he had absorbed growing up. The film barely made noise theatrically, but its raw tone stuck with people and later became a cult favorite. Charlie's rough edge began to feel intentional. In 1986, he appeared in Lucas as a clean-cut high school quarterback, a role that hid real chaos underneath. That same year, he was arrested for assault involving a minor connected to his then-girlfriend Kelly Preston. Years later, the Lucas set was dragged back into the spotlight by allegations from Corey Haim. Sheen denied them, but the shadow remained also. In 1986, he starred in Wisdom, written and directed by his brother Emilio. The production was messy, marked by reckless improvisation and risky stunts. The film failed commercially, but critics noticed Charlie's intensity. In hindsight, it felt like a preview of the chaos that would soon define his public image. Around the same time, he accidentally shot himself in the arm with a prop gun, sending him to the hospital and splashing his name across tabloids. Recklessness had officially attached itself to his reputation. Everything changed with Platoon. Charlie beat out thousands of actors for the lead role in Oliver Stone's Vietnam War film. The shoot in the Philippines was brutal, with extreme heat, real boot camp conditions, and constant danger. When the film was released, it became a phenomenon, earning massive box office success and winning Best Picture. At just 21, Charlie was suddenly a serious star. Wall Street pushed him even higher in 1987. As Bud Fox, he played a young man seduced by greed and power. The film defined the decade, and his performance was praised. Off-screen, his cocaine use intensified. In 1988, he overdosed at a party and was hospitalized. The headlines grew louder, but so did his fame. That same year, he starred in Young Guns, leaning fully into danger with real stunts that left him injured. He followed it with 8 Men Out, showing restraint and depth, proving he was more than chaos. By the early 1990s, Charlie Sheen was everywhere. His hot shots turned him into a comedy star and a box office powerhouse. His paycheck jumped into the air. Millions in studios saw him as bankable in any genre. But the balance did not last. Cocaine binges became routine. In 1992, he suffered another severe overdose, prompting a staged family intervention. He entered rehab, and his addiction became public. Despite everything, the movies kept making money, sending a clear message from Hollywood that results mattered more than behavior. Throughout the 1990s, he chased danger both on and off screen, pushing himself through intense military training, dangerous stunts, and reckless personal choices. In 1998, he found new life on television when he joined Spin City. Ratings climbed, his salary soared, and he became one of the highest-paid sitcom actors of the era. He improvised much of his dialogue, and audiences loved the unpredictability. Off-camera, his relationship with Denise Richards unraveled, leading to arrests, restraining orders, and non-stop tabloid coverage. The pattern repeated with even higher stakes on 2.5 Men. By 2010, he was earning nearly $2 million per episode, making him the highest-paid actor in television history. The show became a syndication monster, generating billions. But behind the scenes, his addiction, erratic behavior, and public feuds exploded. His infamous 2011 meltdown turned into global entertainment, but it cost him his job, hundreds of millions in future earnings and nearly everything he had built. What followed was collapse, lawsuits, debt, and public humiliation. In 2015, Sheen revealed he had been HIV positive since 2011, admitting he had paid millions in hush money to keep it secret. The revelation changed how the public viewed his past behavior and added a darker layer to his downfall. His net worth shrank dramatically, and his career moved to lower-profile projects. In 2017, something finally shifted. After a personal intervention from his daughter, Charlie entered rehab and committed to sobriety. He later spoke about serious health complications that nearly killed him and forced him to face the damage he had done. By 2018, he marked 1 year sober and began reframing his public image, focusing on family, recovery, and quieter projects. By 2025, his story was being presented as a comeback on his own terms. He released a memoir, returned to the stage, and spoke openly about fatherhood and stability. But controversy followed him again when he claimed an experimental HIV drug worked for him and was being suppressed. At the same time, he was seen living quietly in Malibu with a new partner, far removed from the chaos that once defined him. Charlie Sheen's life has always lived in extremes. Massive success and public collapse, reinvention and relapse, confession and denial. Now, as he reemerges once more, the question remains the same. Is this finally the full truth, or just another chapter in a story he has never fully finished telling? The years stacked up. The weight of that unfinished truth only grew heavier. Every comeback attempt carried an asterisk. Every public appearance was filtered through decades of memory. People no longer watched Charlie Sheen simply to see what he would do next. They watched to see what would go wrong. Even in sobriety, even in calmer interviews, there was an unspoken tension, the sense that the storm had paused, not disappeared. Friends close to him have said the biggest change after 2017 was not the absence of drugs or alcohol, but the absence of noise. The phones stopped ringing at all hours. The parties disappeared. The entourage thinned out until only a few familiar faces remained. For the first time since his teens, Sheen was spending long stretches of time alone with himself. That, by his own admission, was the hardest part. Without chaos, there was nowhere to hide from memory. He began waking up early, something he once mocked. Mornings were filled with routine instead of recovery, coffee instead of pills. Long walks along the Malibu shoreline where he had once raced cars and courted headlines. Neighbors described him as polite, quiet, almost invisible. A man who had once dominated tabloids now blended into the background. For someone who spent his life being watched, anonymity felt strange, even uncomfortable. Fatherhood became the center of that new routine. He stopped talking about his kids as obligations and started talking about them as anchors. School plays, homework nights, small arguments over dinner. Moments most people take for granted felt monumental to him because he had missed so many. Before, he admitted that there were days when guilt hit harder than any hangover ever had. No drug had ever made him feel as sick as the realization that his children had grown up watching him self-destruct on television. Still, the past refused to stay buried. Lawsuits settled quietly, but the stories lingered online forever. Old interviews resurfaced whenever his name trended. Clips of the 2011 breakdown circulated again and again, stripped of context and replayed like a punchline. Even when he spoke calmly, people waited for the punchline. When he didn't give them one, suspicion replaced laughter. The memoir was meant to be the final word, the definitive version of events. He framed it as honesty, but critics called it selective memory. Some praised him for admitting things he had denied for years. Others accused him of reframing old behavior to fit a redemption arc. He insisted he was not rewriting history, just finally telling it without drugs in his system. Whether people believed him depended less on the words and more on how much grace they were willing to give. The podcast appearance in late 2025 reopened wounds he thought had healed. His comments about an experimental HIV drug were vague but explosive. Scientists pushed back immediately, saying treatment options had improved steadily for years and that no miracle cure was being hidden. Supporters argued he was speaking from personal experience, not medical expertise. Skeptics saw something else, a familiar pattern of conspiracy, defiance, and mistrust of authority that had followed him his entire life. What unsettled people most was not the claim itself, but the tone. It wasn't the erratic rage of his past. It was calm, confident, almost rehearsed. That scared some fans more than any wild rant ever had. They wondered if this was growth or simply a more controlled version of the same instinct to fight systems. Blame forces larger than himself and position himself as the outsider who knows a truth others refuse to see. Meanwhile, his personal life remained deliberately quiet. He stopped confirming relationships. He stopped responding to rumors. Friends said he learned the hard way that visibility had always been his drug of choice. Attention had fueled him just as much as cocaine ever did. Now, privacy was part of his recovery. The Malibu sightings were rare enough to feel accidental. No red carpets, no social media declarations. Just glimpses, then silence. Financially, the gap between past and present was impossible to ignore. Even with touring and book sales, the money was a shadow of what he once earned in a single season of television. That reality humbled him in ways rehab never could. There was no studio safety net anymore, no massive contracts waiting if he stumbled. Every decision mattered because there was no second empire left to burn. Yet, something about that limitation seemed to stabilize him. He stopped chasing relevance and focused instead on sustainability. Small acting roles were considered carefully. Stage performances replaced soundstage chaos. He learned his lines early, showed up on time. Crew members who worked with him in recent years described him as professional, even generous. It was shocking. For others, it was overdue. Still, redemption is not a switch you flip. It is something negotiated daily with the past. For every fan willing to believe in his change, there was another who couldn't forget the damage. Allegations. Arrests, hospital visits, shattered hotel rooms. Those images were burned into public memory. No memoir or sobriety chip could erase them. Charlie Sheen now exists in a strange space between legend and warning. To some, he is proof that survival is possible even after total collapse. To others, he is a reminder of what unchecked power, addiction, and fame can destroy. He is both comeback story and cautionary tale, often at the same time. What makes his current chapter so compelling is not the absence of chaos, but the uncertainty. People are no longer watching to see him explode. They're watching to see if he can stay quiet. In a career built on excess, restraint has become the real test, and maybe that is the truth he has never fully spoken. Not about drugs or fame or medicine, but about identity. For most of his life, Charlie Sheen was defined by reaction. By applause, outrage, laughter, and shock. Now, stripped of those extremes, he is left with something unfamiliar. A life that does not demand performance. Whether that life lasts is something only time can answer. But for the first time in decades, the question surrounding Charlie Sheen is no longer what scandal comes next. It is whether he can live without one. That question sits quietly underneath everything he does now. It follows him into interviews, rehearsals, and late nights alone when the house is finally still. For someone who spent decades creating noise, to outrun his own thoughts, silence can feel louder than any crowd. He has admitted that sobriety did not bring peace right away. It brought clarity, and clarity brought consequences. Every decision he once blurred or avoided became sharp and unavoidable in private conversations. He has described moments where memory hits without warning. A line from an old movie, a song playing in a grocery store, a headline from years ago resurfacing on someone else's phone. Those moments pull him backward, not into nostalgia, but into accountability. He no longer has the luxury of pretending those years were just wild fun. He sees the collateral damage clearly now. Careers derailed, relationships burned, trust broken in ways that never fully repair. The hardest part, according to people close to him, is accepting that some doors stay closed forever. Hollywood forgives many things, but it does not forget. Studios may take meetings, but they do not build empires around him anymore. Assurance costs rise. Contracts shrink. The risk calculation has changed, and he understands that no amount of good behavior can erase decades of volatility. That reality once would have triggered anger. Now it mostly triggers resignation. There are days he misses the intensity. Not the drugs themselves, but the feeling of being unstoppable, of waking up knowing the world was watching, waiting. That kind of attention is intoxicating in a way sobriety can never replace. He has admitted that boredom is one of his biggest threats. Not temptation, not peer pressure, but emptiness. The long stretches of normalcy where nothing dramatic happens and no one cares enough to react to manage that. He leans into structure, schedules, accountability, therapy that digs deeper than surface-level addiction talk. He has spoken about learning how much of his behavior was tied to validation, not chemistry. Drugs amplified it, but they did not create it. That hunger to be seen started long before fame, rooted in childhood moments when attention was inconsistent and approval felt conditional. His relationship with his father has also evolved in quieter ways. They are no longer defined by public appearances or shared projects. The conversations are slower now, more reflective. There's less advice and more listening. Age has softened things between them, but it has also sharpened awareness of time. Regret is not discussed directly, but it hangs in the room. Both men understand it without needing to name it. Public perception remains divided, and he has stopped trying to control it. In the past, he fought every narrative, insulted critics, and turned conflict into performance. Now, he lets stories pass without comment, because they don't hurt, but because he has learned that reaction feeds the cycle. Silence for him is not avoidance anymore. It is strategy. Even so, moments like the canceled show in late 2025 reveal how fragile trust still is. One cough, one delay, one vague explanation, and the internet races back to its worst assumptions, relapse, collapse. He understands that this suspicion may never go away. The past trained people to expect disaster. Living with that expectation is part of his penance. He does not ask for forgiveness publicly anymore. Talks about responsibility instead. Forgiveness implies closure, and his story does not have that. Responsibility is ongoing. It shows up in how he parents, how he works, how he exits rooms without making himself the center. It is less cinematic than redemption, but more sustainable. There is also an unspoken fear that lingers beneath his calm exterior. Aging for someone whose identity was built on youth, rebellion, and excess. Growing older forces a reckoning. Body no longer absorbs damage the same way. Health scares carry more weight. Mortality feels closer, less abstract. The idea of legacy, once mocked, now matters more than he admits. That is why the questions around medicine and health strike such a nerve. Control over his body, his survival, his future. After years of being out of control, any hint of agency feels powerful. Whether his claims are rooted in misunderstanding or mistrust, they reflect something deeper. A man who spent his life being acted upon by fame, addiction, and consequence now wants ownership over his narrative and his fate. What the public sees as contradiction may simply be transition. He is not the person he was, but he is not fully comfortable with who he is becoming either. Growth is rarely clean, especially when lived under a microscope. Mistakes made quietly by others are amplified when attached to his name. If there is a final irony in Charlie Sheen's story, It is this. The man who once thrived on extremes now survives by avoiding them. No winning slogans, no grand gestures, no declarations of dominance, just consistency. Day after day, choice after choice. That kind of discipline does not trend. It does not sell tickets the way chaos once did. It keeps him alive. And maybe. That is the real comeback. It's not a return to stardom, not a triumphant headline, but the ability to exist without imploding. 2. Wake up without damage control, to be present without performing. For someone who spent decades burning brighter and faster than everyone around him, learning how to live at a normal temperature may be the hardest role he has ever taken on.